looking at my cheat sheet down here. Cuidaba. Nije Correwe Rochelle Gutiérrez. I am so honored and proud to be with you this morning. Buenos dias. If you're visiting from other spaces, maybe if you're coming from New Zealand or somewhere else, doesn't feel like buenos dias to you. Maybe it's buenas noches or something else, but just know that we are all here and we are all loving to be together. I'm talking a little bit about what it feels like for me to be thinking about how do I try to become a good ancestor in education. And I hope that sharing my story about that will help you think about how are you becoming a good ancestor. But I want to start with truth and right relations, and I don't say this is a land acknowledgement on purpose. I want to say that we have to think about how do we come into right relations. We are currently gathering on the Kumeyaay lands, the nations who've been here for 12,000 years. That's, do the math, 600 generations. 600 generations people were here before us and are still here with us and connected to lands and are still guiding us with what we should be doing in our spaces right now on their lands. It's important for you to be thinking, if you do a land acknowledgement as a teacher, as a leader, anybody who's standing up at a podium, to first of all, do your work. Find out, what do you understand about these peoples? You're a guest on their lands. What do you learn? What do you want to know? And I think that even in a very simple way, we can also just recognize that we're in relation to lands and waters. So I want you to pause and take a moment and ask yourself, how are you connected to the lands and waters here? If you had coffee this morning, water remembered her responsibility to you. If you ate breakfast this morning, the plants remembered their responsibility to you. There's so many ways that land holds us, even when we don't recognize and acknowledge land. So I stop and say that I greet land, I honor lands and waters here, I honor the Kumeyaay people who have given us the ability to think about our responsibilities to them, and also for you to be thinking about your responsibilities to your ancestors. I start with an affirmation. I do this with all my classes. Every class I teach, every professional development I do, I always start with an affirmation. And I would say, this is Michelle's intention. She says we need to think about attention and intention. And so I think we need to have an intention. And so for me, I just say, we're moving forward, moving toward a future that we cannot yet see, but that we trust is good. We cannot change the past, so we focus on the now. And this moment is ours together. Yes, education is being attacked, but we each have gifts to give in this world, and we will give them freely. We are constantly working to become good ancestors. And I want you to think about that when I said this moment is ours together. There has never been another you, the version of you that is right here, right now. There has never been another we, and there never will be another we as we are right now. So what is our responsibility to ourselves, to our ancestors, past, present, and future, to engage in this moment, to be open to whatever it is we're supposed to be hearing and learning and absorbing right now? And I don't say that to be centering myself. I think that there are things and people that are in this room that are also going to engage you. So I have so many wonderful, beautiful women in my life. And I grew up on Muwekma Ohlone lands, California Bay. And I grew up in an activist Chicana family. My mother was friends with Dolores Huerta. We were often fighting for the rights of campesinos, farm workers, and people who were undocumented. And I watched my mother constantly gathering with other women, organizing for the rights of other people, in particular for mothers and women later in her life, for mothers and women who had children who were undocumented and needed to understand how to navigate the school system. But my mother, both my parents, raised us to understand our place in this world. Both of my parents picked in the fields And we understood that people aren't actually farm workers. They are people who are in relation to land. They don't work the land. They are in relation to land, and land teaches us. And so my mother would gather with her good friends. I used to call them Las Marias, because there were 4 Marias. There was Maria Romo, Maria Ramirez, Maria Torres, and Maria Granados. Maria Granados was from El Salvador, but the rest were Chicana. And my mother would gather with these women, and she would make things happen. It was the women who were making everything happen. They were at the center of everything, and they had this kind of political clarity. My parents put us in Teatro Campesino. Teatro Campesino was about learning how to develop stories, understand how your story and the stories that have come before us are related, and then take those stories to people in the fields. One of my mom's best friends, Maria Ramirez, so I show, she had, my mom helped create this network called Latina Leadership Network. That's the community college system in California. And her friend Maria had written a president's message, and this is, 2008. 2008, she was writing about this, and she was saying that she was welcoming people to the gathering, and she says, our unifying motivation in your success in education, employment, and life. We know the depth of your yearnings, your secret dreams and aspirations, your numerous untapped talents and abilities, your strength and resilience, your deep faith and spirituality. How do we know? Our indigenous Mayan elders taught us, we are you, and you are us in Lak'ech. So I was surrounded by these women who had this deep sense of who they were and their deep sense of what they are doing in this world. And when they move in the world, how is that a form of education? That education is not happening just in schools. It's not happening through texts. We learn through dreaming, through making, through seeing, through singing, through many different ways, right? So my mother, tortillas for me are a political act. They're a political act because my mother, so I grew up loving tortillas, so of course. In the beginning, my mother used to only make flour tortillas. But so like that sound, if anybody knows that sound of boom, boom, pa, boom, boom, pa, boom, boom, pa, that was making the flour tortillas, right? As we got older, my mom decided to start making corn tortillas. So she would make corn tortillas on Wednesdays, and she'd make flour tortillas on Sundays. And she said to me, the corn tortillas, these white flour tortillas, this is really like, that's the colonizers' way. Like that now we're using like white flour. Like our people actually, we eat corn tortillas. So I gotta make corn tortillas. And the very act of making a tortilla is being in relation. Corn is our relative. So as we are making tortillas, we are literally pressing ourselves in connection to corn every day. And then we're ingesting that corn, and that corn is becoming us. It's helping remake who we are. And I say it's a political act because, so it was political for her to start making corn tortillas again when we got a little bit older, but it was also a political act in the sense that we cultivated our relatives. Corn was not a naturally grown vegetable. It comes from teosinte. It's a grass. Our ancestors had the wisdom, the patience, the direction, and the clarity to hybridize this grass over centuries to get to the form of corn that we have today. And so thinking about how that is with me, that is with us, this ancestral knowledge. But I say it's a political act because my mother would go to meetings with people in the community. She started as a farm worker as a child. When she got pregnant with my sister, she stayed at home with the 4 of us, raised the 4 of us to go to school and go off to colleges. And then when I was in high school, she went back to school and got a degree in psychology and started working in the community college system. And when she was doing all of this work to meet with community people, when you were fighting for the rights of other people, you often had to be in contact with people who were officials, right? Officials in organizations. And she would meet with people, and she would bring them a warm stack of tortillas. And she would come to this meeting, and she would give them the tortillas and say, "Oh, I made these for you." And she'd normally give them like a little jar of salsa that she had just made, and like, aguacate and grilled tofu and whatever else that she had. And she would give them to this person, and the administrator or the person in charge would just kind of look at her like, "You made me tortillas?" Like, literally, these are still warm, and it would change the nature of the whole thing. And she didn't do it to be manipulative. She did it out of an act of love. That this person has probably had a really busy day, has not eaten anything recently. And so my giving them tortillas right now may be the thing that they need to get by, to be able to do the right thing for the next person in line. She never said any of this to me, right? I don't say this in a way of like she sat us down and was like, our ancestors, they created the corn and, But it was in all the ways that we know. It was in all the ways that she taught us to watch, to observe. We were 4 kids going to protests, sitting down and meet long meetings, organizing people. You're just sitting on the floor, whatever, you're coloring or you're trying to read or something, and you're watching. You're taking it all in. You're watching how people are moving through the world, and that was my form of education. So her activism and the activism of the women that she was in circles with really modeled for me something that I use in my work now, and that is creative insubordination. Creative insubordination came from the people. She taught me that when you are fighting for the rights of other people, we don't need no stinking badges. And so we don't have to play by the rules of other people. You don't have to be a rule follower all the time. You don't have to do what's legal, what's professional, what's whatever, because we hold ourselves to a higher ethical standard. We know we're here to do work. And so we don't ask for permission, right? We know our ancestors are guiding us to be in this moment. Yes, thank you. Yeah. So this term, creative insubordination, became something that I thought, Kai, can you teach other people this? Did you have to grow up learning and living in these ways? Or can you actually support other teachers to figure out what does it mean to be creatively insubordinate? And my emphasis is on the word creative, right? I am not trying to get people fired. I am not trying to be glamorous and say like, oh, you need to stand up for this, you need to fight that battle, you need to fight that, oh yeah, and go get those people over there too, right? That's not what I'm saying. But when she stood in front of people and said, we look around and we see that the campesinos are not being treated humanely. I think a lot of people right now think about, oh, I need to buy organic food because it's good for me, it's good for my body. I grew up understanding that you buy organic because the workers are being sprayed pesticides on top of them because it is not in the interest of capitalists to give the workers breaks, take days off so they can spray their fields and then let them rest. So this is an act of solidarity when you are buying organic food. This is not just about you and your health. This is about the health of the planet. This is about the health of the people, the workers who are there. So again, if you're working and you're doing if you're standing up for justice, you're going to have people who are going to tell you no. So my mom would just say, you go and you ask that person, can you get this thing different, or can you change this, or can you have funds for this, or whatever? And she's like, and if they tell you no, that's not allowable, you just smile and you move around them and you find some other person to talk to, right? And then you get their name and you're like, yeah, this person said I could do it, so we're good now, right? So again, I felt like there were people around me who were modeling, who were educating me about what it meant to be a good ancestor. So I said my mother ended up going to work at a community college system. She became a counselor. And she convinced people to go to community colleges, but she also helped people make their transition from that 2-year to the 4-year. Because many of you may know that when you're in a community college, you're taking classes, you're not really sure what you're doing. You're just accumulating credits. You're not really, like, where do these all go? If somebody's not helping you navigate that system, yeah, it's a great place to go to community college to save money, but then how do you get to the next space, right? So that was the work that my mother would do. She would help people figure out, how do I get to that next place? And she would do this by helping people figure out, what do they want to do? What are your gifts in the world? What do you want to study? Somebody would say, oh, I want to study, marine biology. And she would say, okay, then you don't go to San Jose State, which is right, this is what everybody thinks. Everybody thinks, like, you finish community college, you go to the nearby, school that and she's like, no, you need to be going to Scripps. They're down in, like, the Claremont colleges, or like, oh, you want to study robotics? No, you go to MIT. They've got a robotics lab. She didn't know any of this stuff. She went and looked it up. She went and did the work for students. What could be a place that you could be? We heard earlier that, well, what if somebody wants to go into, like, video gaming? They don't all have to be coders. There's all kinds of people who work in video gaming. You could be doing finance of video gaming. You could be doing, like, education in video gaming. You could be doing all kinds of things. But I grew up with watching her convince people all the time to go back. And she was an example. She was somebody who went back to college as an adult. So she could say, I raised 4 kids, then I went to college, then I did these things. We have this open school system in the United States, right? You're not determined by what choice you made when you left high school, whether you graduated or not. And so she was incredible at convincing people to go to college. We'd be out shopping, we'd be out just wherever we were, and she'd be getting people to go back to college. And it was like, I would come home to visit. I was in Chicago, I would come home to the Bay, and I'd be like, so Mom, we're gonna go shop, we're gonna go yeah. And then, like, as we're in line, like, you need to think about community college. We go to a taqueria, like 5 minutes. How long does it take you to get fast food tacos? Like 5 minutes. And in those 5 minutes, she would have convinced the person who took our order, the guy, the cook, the person packaging it, whatever, to think about going to community college. And I used to think, I was along with her, and I saw this all growing up. I mean, if it wasn't about, organizing for people's rights or going to community college, it was about whatever was the thing. But she just would, everywhere she was, this thing was happening. And I remember. Again, I would see her do this, and I would think, well, of course, Mom. I mean, like, you're Chicana, you're Mexicana, like, these guys are looking at you. You're like an older woman. What are they going to say? No, I don't want to take your card, to go to community college. Like, of course they're going to take your card. And then she'd say, no, remember those guys that, years later, and she would tell me all these stories. Yeah, remember those guys that we met at that taqueria? Yeah. Mario's working on his, degree in communications down at Mount Holyoke, and so is doing it. And I was like, really? And she was smart. She would get people to go to college in teams. She understood that in a family, and especially with young Latinas, I can hear snaps. You don't have to be quiet. Like, we're in a room. Like, we're sharing this space. So she would recognize that, like, a family might not want their young Latina daughter to go to Harvard, which was on the East Coast, because they were going to be alone. So she would make these deals. She would call up admissions officers, and she would I feel like she had this sprinkle dust. Like, the whole, like, these are not the droids you're looking for. Like, she would be like, these are the students that you need in your university. They were not even done with community college, and she had gotten them acceptances at these universities. But then she would say, and I got 2 for you, a 2 for 1. So today's your day. So she would send, and she would say to the families, and we got people on the other side who are going to meet them. They're going to pick them up at the airport. They're going to watch over them. They're going to see how they're doing in their 4 years, but they're going to have each other at least right now, right? She understood that. She understood the importance of familia and relationships and doing this in our way. Not, the big part sometimes is not getting somebody admitted to a college. It's helping somebody thrive once they get there. It's helping them be whole while they're in those white spaces. Thank you. So there was this one time, and I was older. I am older now, okay. I had 3 children, and I had a young son, and he wanted a jacket at Costco. So we went to the San Jose Costco. Costco didn't have it, but the Gilroy Costco had it. So they call him up. They're holding the jacket for you. You can go with your mom to go get it. And I'm thinking, okay, here we go. We're in the car. Woo-hoo, yeah, get to Costco. And I was like, no, she can't do this. Like, we got one item, like literally like $29.95. Ping, thank you. Here's your check. We get in line. Sure enough, $29.99. Ping. And my mom says, so you're in college? and the girl says, no. And my mom says, but you want to be. And she said, well, I mean, I thought about college, but I have a baby. And my mom says, and there's no one who would watch your baby? And she said, well, I live with my parents. Maybe my mom. And my mom says, if it were my daughter and there was anything I could do to support her in education, I would watch her baby. And the girl looks at my mom, and she goes, her eyes get really wide, and she goes, you think I can go to college? My mom says, I know you can. She said, here's my card. I'll help you. I'll help you pick classes. And she would do this. So she, here we are. Pick classes. Women behind us, excuse me. And I'm like, yep, here it comes, people. This is not a community bazaar. This is not this is Costco. Like, move along. And my mom, she said yes, and the woman says, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but my son is living on our couch, and would it be possible if, could I get your card? He really needs to go to college. Woman behind her, can I, if you're giving your card out, can I also get your card? So that was my life. My life was watching my mother and these other powerful women move through the world and do what was necessary to support ourselves thriving and our communities. So don't get afraid of the big words. We're going to talk about what the big words mean. But I think it's important that we are able to talk about these words. So I have an abuela rule in my classes and in my work. And the abuela rule is this: we need to be able to communicate with each other in ways that are understandable to our grandmothers. And I am not saying that we need to water down or distill or somehow dumb down the ideas that we have. But our abuelas carry such wisdom in this world. We do not want to waste their time with jargon when we can just say things simply. But there is power in words. So when we need to be able to do that code switching, right? We want to be able to pull up their language and say, I know what ontology means. I know what axiology and epistemology means. So ontology is just how we view the world. What is our existence? I think the ontological shift we need to take right now in education is to recognize that we are the younger brothers and sisters in this world, that lands and waters and animals and skies and plants have been here for millennia before us, teaching us how to be. And we have so much we still have not learned from them. Epistemology is just all the different ways that we know. So I said earlier, our people, we're storytellers, right? I can do this all day, and then you put me in front of a computer, and it's like, now you got to turn that into a paper. It's like, dang, here comes that code switching stuff. So all the ways that we know, again, are we honoring those in schools? Are we honoring that students know through felt knowledge, through their intuition? You all know this. You get into an elevator, and you have that sinking feeling like, ooh, something's not right here, I don't feel safe, and you get off the elevator. That's knowing you are carrying in your body, and you can't put it down on a piece of paper or put it into a symbolic equation, but it is knowing that you have. So thinking about all those, the dreaming, the making, the singing, the dancing, the listening, all of that proper asking, those all need to be part of our systems in education. And then axiology is just values. What are the values that we have? Are the values about individual people rising up and accumulating stuff and pride and status? Or is this about continuing the work that has come before us and what are our responsibilities to our ancestors? So my parents have taught me to know who you are and know where you've come from, because we can't know where we're going if we don't know that. And it means honoring our culture and being a good ancestor. My parents raised me to understand that my entire life's work is figuring out what are the gifts that I have to give in this world, and then how do I give those freely? And it is about abundance. It's not about hoarding. And in this process, they reminded me that knowledge is relational. Knowledge is relational. You know, in Spanish, we have two ways to talk about knowing. We have, shout it out. What's one verb for knowing, in Spanish? Saber. What's another one? Conocer, right? And we distinguish, right? We say saber is the thing, like if you know 2 + 2 is 4. But conocer is like, you know my grandmother. I would never use the verb saber to talk about knowing my grandmother, because there's a relational, you can't know somebody in some kind of objectified way, right? But my parents actually taught me that there is no objectified way of knowing. Even that saber is a trick. It's the colonizer's trick. It's the fact that the Spanish is the colonizing language, when raramuri is what my people spoke. So on the one hand, I can open us up and say that in the English language, we don't have the ability to distinguish between relational knowing and objective knowing. But then I can also say that my ancestors have taught me that, like, even making that distinction is needing to come back and say, and it's actually all relational, if we want to, like, get this right. And so stories are literal and they're metaphorical. Greg Cajete talks about this beautifully, that the metaphorical mind, right? The metaphorical mind is being able to take something that's said and think about what's abstract about it. So you're listening to me tell these stories. Maybe when I told that story about my mom, about the time in Costco, you heard something. You heard, yeah, that's like me. Or maybe you heard, like, dang, how could we use that in education? Or maybe you thought, like, oh yeah, I know a person like that. Or like, I wish I had a mom like that. I don't know what you heard, but you heard something you were supposed to hear, right? The literal is like, I told a story. I told the words coming out of my mouth. That was the literal. But the metaphorical is what you needed to hear. My father was a much more quiet person, and he didn't always talk a lot to us, to be honest, as kids. My mom raised us, and my dad, he was an electrician. He went to his job. When he came home, you handed him a beer or the newspaper or something, and you kind of got out of the way. And so my father, he was an electrician, and he was a union worker, the IBEW, Local 332, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. And so we knew every store that was built with union labor and which ones were not and that we would not go to. And we always, 4 kids would pile into, with my parents, would pile into a station wagon with like the wood paneling on the sides, yeah? We'd pile into that station wagon and we'd go across town to get milk or whatever. And I was tired of this. I remember one time I was about 8 years old. I was playing, I was doing my thing. And I was doing my thing, and we were like, we gotta go get in the car. And I was like, got in the car, I'm sitting there and mumbling to myself, like, and I know not to say anything out loud to my parents to be rude, right? They raised me to be a good daughter. I'm bien educada. I know my place. And so I get in the car, and I mumbled. I thought I mumbled to myself, but my parents heard me. I said, why can't we just go to Safeway? Because there was one that was 2 blocks from my house. And my father, who never says anything, says, people think that you vote once every 4 years when you go to the polls. But you vote every day with your feet. We're building the future that we want to belong to. And as an 8-year-old, I remember thinking, like, you didn't even answer my question. How come we can't go to Safeway? And also, what does it mean to vote with your feet? So again, I had these people who were kind of telling me that there's like, we don't have to wait for a future. We are building that future now. We are that future. And the decisions and how we move through this world, we are creating that future. We are all gathering under a tree for which I used to say the seed has not yet been planted. And now I will say for which we need to rehydrate the soil, because our ancestors planted that seed long ago. So I was also raised with this term, quisieron enterrarnos sin saber que éramos semilla. It's a phrase in Mexico. And, when we would fight, we're an activist, you fight a lot, right? And you feel like a lot of times people are putting you down. And my mom would just remind us, she would say that, quisieron enterrarnos sin saber que éramos semilla. They tried to bury us. They didn't know we were seeds. And again, that proverb goes back to the power and the strength of seeds, right? That's honoring our place in this world, that seeds are our teacher. We know that in forced removals, people sewed seeds into their dresses or into their clothing and took them with them. Those seeds have been held for just the right time to be recultivated, and we are rehydrating those seeds now in seed banks. You can look up rematriation of lands. I'm not sure, I'm trying to think time-wise. So the other elephant in the room is that maybe some of you heard that my background's in math and you thought, she's gonna talk to us about math stuff at the keynote. Like, am I gonna have to do, I went into a session and somebody was talking about how they had done their math wrong about the break and how long the break was gonna be. And I felt like, oh my goodness, my presence is making somebody feel like they literally looked at me and were like, okay, I can't do the math, and people had to leave. People are supposed to be back in 15 minutes, not 20 minutes, and that's my fault. And I just thought, like, oh, what that thing that math does to people. Math is just a story. Math is a story we tell. We could tell another story. Throughout history, we have had other ways of viewing the world. In the 17th century, we had much more geometric and spatial forms of mathematics. Today, almost everything is based on algebra. Right? And it serves a purpose for some people. But we don't have to belong to those worlds if we don't want. We don't need no stinking badges. So these stories that get told about mathematics being universal, and so people will say, why are you trying to make teachers be activists? Like, math is not political. Like, math is just math. 2 + 2 is 4 no matter where you go, right? And it's like, well, that's a very narrow view of mathematics, right? That's like telling an English teacher, like, A and B are C and A and T spells cat, right? That's English. It's like, no, that's not really English or literacy. But so when we think about mathematics, you need to think about, why aren't we inviting our bodies? Why don't we need our bodies to do mathematics, as an example? Why is it that we think somehow mathematics is up in the head? We know that we actually use our bodies. And I mean, even just think about the smallest things. When kids are little and they're learning to count, we count it on our fingers. We were given manipulatives at the ends of our extremities. We have 20 of them ready to use. We don't even Cuisinart rods, right? We've got 20 little things right here that we can count on. But we are taught to feel shameful for using our bodies. Those are all scripts that we've been handed, colonial scripts that we've been handed, that we don't have to accept. We can say, I need to figure out, okay, it's 3 o'clock, and I need 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, I'm going to meet you in 7 hours, right? That's a perfectly fine thing to do. I'm not saying that we want to have people be reliant on that all of the time in schools, but we can use that as a jumping off point, right? And there's ways that we need to think about how is it that mathematics has this unearned privilege in our society? Like, who gave mathematics this privilege? Why do we say that if you can do mathematics, you're smart? Why don't we say, if you could think holistically, you're smart? Or if you can relate well to people, you're smart? Or if you're artistic, you're smart? Those are all pattern Those are all forms of logic. I would argue those are all mathematics. So we need to think about, when are we giving too much power to these scripts in our world? When we say things like numbers are either even or they're odd, that's privileging this binary logic. But our two-spirit relatives, clownfish, brown bears, teach us that gender is fluid. That it's not an either or, right? So we can, I'm not going to get into all of these, but we can go and start interrogating all the narratives that we hold up as truths in mathematics, and then how does that damage us? And how does that keep us from being whole, from using our bodies, from using the intuition that we have? So I think that we're in a space in education where we need to move from a kind of socio-political to a spiritual space. The socio-political acknowledge that we think about our intersectional identities and power, and so like in mathematics, if we say, oh, we really cared a lot about who does mathematics, who gets credit for mathematics, that's all good. But how do we see mathematics as a way to reattach to each other? How do we use mathematics as that form instead of as a form of dividing and categorizing and tracking and deciding who is valid or who is valuable? So I'm going to just say this. So when I say spirituality, I'm not talking about New Age spiritualism or organized religion. I'm really saying that in Black African tradition, in Jewish tradition, we have all of these ways in which we recognize that part of our roles in this world is to figure out how to bring ourselves back together. We've all been touched by the grief of diaspora. We have all been ripped from lands, either forcefully, or in our minds. When we thought we were free, we were escaping from other places, maybe we weren't. And what are our connections to those lands? So that the idea of spirituality is saying, how do we learn to reattach to each other and to our more than human relatives? There are many ways in which we can interrupt the narratives that are being written about us, about our people, about our futures. And one of those ways is that in 2019, indigenous communities in Colombia. This was a shout out to the group that came from Colombia. I don't know if they're still here. People in the house from Colombia? Yeah, los veo. That when we think about our work and how difficult it is to do the work sometimes as an activist, what it feels like there's like a lot of pressure on us, like we got to get it right. So many people are relying on us. This feels very heavy work. There's a lot of people fighting against us. There's this anti-critical race theory legislation. There's people popping up left and right who are telling us that we don't belong, that the words that we say, people telling me that I'm not a mathematician, what right do I have to speak about these things? But we have people all the time who are showing us that what it means to fight and be in connection to lands can also be joyful. And so I want us to listen to this video. And there's going to be a part where you are going to participate. They're singing a song, and they're going to say, Guardia, Guardia, Fuerza, por mi raza, por mi tierra. Okay, so, and I'm just going to say, let's just watch this, and then we'll come back to it. And feel free to stand and be in your body if it moves you. The land knows we're connected when we stomp.
Indios que con valentía y fuerza en sus corazones, indios que con valentía y fuerza en sus corazones, por justicia y pervivencia, hoy empuñan los bastones, por justicia y pervivencia, hoy empuñan los bastones. Son amigos de la paz, van de frente con valor.
tierra piensa, guardia, guardia, fuerza, fuerza, guardianes de la vida, guardianes del planeta, de esta tierra herida, de esta tierra nuestra, astros luminosos protegiendo la paz, bastones poderosos, precursores de paz, la voz de la conciencia representada, con fe, resistencia, con un gran ideal, de respetar la esencia de la tierra heredada y compartir amor y justicia ancestral.
So that video was made in 2019, before the pandemic. That video was made in part because indigenous communities were being seen as primitive, as the ones who were not rule following, who were doing all of these things, and they knew we're the ones who are protecting the planet. The idea from the artists was to create this song that might become like a national a national song. And I think that what's important from that is that they are showing us, all these different indigenous communities in Colombia that came together were showing us that they were the ones who had the path that people should be following, that it's not the other way around. If you take nothing else from this talk, I hope that you will take the idea that there has never been another you. There has never been another us. And your ancestors put you on this path to be here today, to be at this conference, to meet the people you met at this conference, to be present, to hear the things that you needed to hear. And so how are you showing them that you are listening? I want you to stand up. You have your card. I would like you to use your name badge and to raise it high. And I want you to say, they tried to bury us. They didn't know we were seeds. Adelante.